The sharp glint of crystal chandeliers, suspended like frozen tears from the dark, polished wood ceiling, seemed to magnify the silent, stinging ache in Chloe Davis's chest. Her hand, trembling ever so slightly, pressed a crumpled white tissue to the corner of her eye, desperately trying to staunch the wellspring of humiliation that threatened to spill over. Her gaze fixed on the illuminated screen of her smartphone, blurred with unshed tears, making the mundane text from her grandmother asking if she'd eaten an unbearable burden. Every fiber of her being screamed for escape, for a dark corner where the world, and more specifically, the man seated across from her, couldn't see her unravel. The ornate Eastwick bistro, usually a haven of sophisticated clinking and hushed conversations, now felt like a spotlight trained exclusively on her, illuminating her profound inadequacy. Across the table, Brett Harrison, a stockbroker whose expensive suit seemed to radiate an aura of self-importance, was oblivious, or worse, utterly indifferent. He was mid-sentence, pontificating loudly about the abysmal state of the market, oblivious to the woman whose dignity he had just systematically dismantled. His voice, a grating monotone of entitlement, echoed in Chloe's ears, each word a fresh wound. "I mean $10 for a date? That's barely the cost of my commute. You really ought to aim higher, or at least pretend to. It's obvious you're not exactly in my league." The words, delivered with a casual, brutal dismissiveness, had pierced through her carefully constructed composure, leaving her exposed and raw. She had come with $10, a precise, meticulously budgeted sum, enough for a single iced tea and the N-train fare back to Astoria, Queens. It was all she could spare, a testament to a life lived on the razor's edge of financial precarity, a reality Brett Harrison, with his vintage wine and self-congratulatory tales, could never comprehend. The plum-colored dress, her sole indulgence, felt less like cherished attire and more like a cruel joke against the backdrop of his designer fabrics. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of judgment, the silent sting of being underestimated, not for your character but for your circumstance, then you know exactly the profound ache that settled deep in Chloe's chest. It was a pressure that threatened to steal her breath, to shatter the fragile composure she fought so hard to maintain. Sometimes it takes only one person to truly see another, to change everything. If this feeling resonates, leave a like and share this story, because the quiet courage found in moments like these often echoes louder than any shouted insult. But to truly understand how Chloe found herself trapped in this exquisitely painful tableau, amidst the clinking of crystal and the hushed conversations of the city's elite, we must rewind a few hours to the relentless rhythm of a Tuesday evening that began like any other, pushing her ever closer to this unexpected collision of worlds. Chloe Davis, at 28 years old, understood the unforgiving pulse of New York City in a way many never would. Her days were a carefully orchestrated dance of grueling shifts, her hands perpetually calloused, often smelling faintly of industrial-strength cleaning solutions. She was a housekeeper, navigating the glittering, sterile surfaces of Manhattan's most opulent residences, scrubbing away the invisible dust of privilege, while her own modest apartment in Astoria, Queens, offered a quiet, if Spartan, refuge. Every dollar she earned was not just for her skyrocketing rent, but for a singular, unwavering objective: to accumulate enough savings for a specialized treatment for her beloved grandmother, Eleanor. Eleanor, a woman whose laughter used to fill their small Brooklyn brownstone, was now largely confined to a single room, her once spry movements hobbled by worsening arthritis. This dream, though seemingly distant, was the unseen fuel that propelled Chloe forward through endless hours and the casual, often unintentional disdain of the city's elite. Her Tuesday had started before dawn, a familiar cycle of subway commutes and demanding tasks. The final and arguably most challenging stop of her day was the sprawling Park Avenue penthouse of Alexander Vance. His apartment was less a home and more a meticulously curated gallery of wealth, cold and impersonal, yet immaculately maintained. Chloe moved through its vast spaces like a ghost, her presence as subtle as the whisper of a clean cloth, her efficiency unmatched. She knew the exact spot where the light caught a smudge on the glass of his minimalist coffee table, the specific technique required to make his Italian marble floors gleam without a streak. Alexander Vance himself was a man she rarely saw, a fleeting glimpse in a hallway, a stern nod. He was a myth more than a man to his employees, the visionary behind Vance Holdings, a formidable real estate and tech empire. He commanded respect, and Chloe suspected a certain degree of fear. His world was light years away from hers, a universe of private jets and high-stakes deals, while hers revolved around subway transfers and the price of a generic brand of pain reliever for Eleanor. As the late afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the penthouse windows with streaks of orange and purple, Chloe finished her last task. She pulled off her work gloves, the faint scent of lemon polish clinging to her skin. There was no time to linger, no moment for quiet reflection. Tonight was her blind date, a prearranged attempt by her well-meaning co-worker Maria to get Chloe out there. Chloe wasn't exactly enthusiastic, but Eleanor, with her gentle nudges and wistful sighs about grandchildren, had planted a seed of curiosity. She'd promised Maria she would try. So, with a weary but hopeful heart, she hurried back to Astoria, her mind already racing through the evening's logistics. A quick shower, a change into her cherished plum-colored dress, a rare indulgence bought during a sale 2 years prior, and she was ready. She clutched her worn faux leather purse, its contents meticulously calculated, her Metro card, a lip balm, her phone, and precisely $10. This was her budget for the evening, a sum that felt both hopeful and terrifyingly small. The chosen venue, the Eastwick Bistro, a moderately trendy Italian spot nestled in the vibrant East Village, felt both aspirational and intimidating. It was the kind of place Chloe usually only glimpsed through taxi windows, a world away from her usual haunts. She arrived 5 minutes early, her stomach fluttering with a nervous blend of anticipation and apprehension. She scanned the bustling room, filled with the murmur of conversations and the seductive aroma of garlic and fresh pasta. 10 minutes passed, then 15, 20. Her confidence began to wane, replaced by a familiar knot of insecurity. Just as she considered calling Maria, a man approached her table, his face a carefully composed mask of annoyance. "Chloe, Brett Harrison," he stated, not asked, his hand extending for a limp shake. He was dressed in an expensive, perfectly tailored suit that seemed to radiate an air of disdain even before he spoke. He was 25 minutes late, offering only a perfunctory, dismissive apology, before sliding into the chair opposite her. He barely waited for her to acknowledge him before launching into a loud, self-aggrandizing monologue about his latest trading triumphs, the cutthroat world of finance, and the exquisite vintage of the wine he immediately ordered, barely glancing at the menu. Chloe listened, her initial hope steadily eroding. He ordered a costly appetizer and a main course, both without consulting her, making it abundantly clear that her polite request for an iced tea was a laughable affront to his sophisticated palate. He didn't ask her about her day, her job, her interests. He spoke at her, his words a relentless barrage of ego and thinly veiled condescension. She felt herself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller in the opulent space, wishing she could simply disappear. Then came the moment that shattered her resolve, the verbal barb that left a gaping bleeding wound. Brett paused, his eyes, cold and scrutinizing, raking over her plum dress, her simple earrings, her worn purse. He leaned forward, his voice dropping slightly but still loud enough for nearby tables to catch the humiliating words. "Look, Chloe, I'm just being honest. You know, you really don't seem to grasp the kind of effort one puts into a date with me. I'm talking about investment, presentation, and frankly, your lack of effort is obvious. I mean, $10 for a date. That's barely the cost of my commute. You really ought to aim higher, or at least pretend to. It's obvious you're not exactly in my league." The blood rushed to Chloe's face, a familiar hot flush of shame. It felt like a punch to the gut, a public declaration of her inadequacy, her poverty, her place in the social hierarchy he so clearly inhabited. She felt the tears welling, hot and stinging, threatening to betray the steely defiance that had for years been her only shield against the world's casual cruelties. She fought them back, refusing to grant him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would not cry, not here, not now, not in front of him. Her gaze met his, unwavering, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Unbeknownst to Chloe, in a discreet alcove table tucked away from the main thoroughfare of the bustling dining room, sat Alexander Vance himself, a man in his early 40s. Alexander was, as usual, a picture of immaculate composure, though a subtle tension often hummed beneath his polished exterior. His life was a meticulously planned sequence of strategic decisions, high-stakes negotiations, and a profound emotional detachment, a consequence of a personal tragedy years earlier that had hardened his heart against casual sentiment. He was rarely seen dining in such public mid-range establishments, preferring the insulated privacy of his penthouse or the hushed exclusivity of members-only clubs. Tonight, however, a last-minute cancellation had left him with an unexpected gap in his schedule, and a rare, uncharacteristic impulse had led him to this bistro, a place he frequented in his youth. He found himself observing the vibrant, unfiltered drama of city life, a detached anthropologist in his own habitat. His attention had been drawn by the booming, self-important voice from the table near the window. He instantly recognized Chloe, his quiet and efficient housekeeper, a woman whose presence in his life had always been as subtle as the whisper of a clean cloth, leaving behind only the scent of polished surfaces and an inexplicable sense of order. He watched, fascinated and appalled, as Brett Harrison's boorishness escalated, culminating in the public mockery of Chloe's carefully budgeted $10. Alexander, a man who rarely allowed emotion to cloud his judgment, felt an unfamiliar jolt. He witnessed the almost imperceptible tremor in Chloe's hands as she reached for her phone, the tightening of her jaw, the quiet dignity with which she absorbed each cruel barb. He saw the flicker of pain behind her eyes, quickly masked by a fierce, determined composure. A spark, long dormant, ignited within him, an unfamiliar surge of indignation. His objective for the evening, a quiet dinner, evaporated, replaced by an urgent, uncharacteristic impulse to intervene. It wasn't pity for his employee that stirred him. Not precisely. It was a sudden, deep-seated respect for her unwavering poise in the face of such unwarranted cruelty, and an undeniable revulsion at the man's unmitigated arrogance. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was less about Chloe's social standing and more about his own moral compass, a silent directive demanding action. He watched as Chloe, her eyes now brimming, reached for the tissue, a single tear finally escaping, tracing a path down her cheek. The man across from her continued to ramble, completely oblivious to the devastation he had wrought. Alexander's gaze hardened. He saw the injustice, stark and undeniable, laid bare on Chloe's face, and in that moment, he knew he could not remain a detached observer. The narrative of her humiliation, witnessed by him, was about to take an unexpected, life-altering turn, not just for Chloe, but for the millionaire himself. A hush, thick and sudden, fell over the Eastwick bistro as Alexander Vance rose from his table. It was not a grand, theatrical gesture, but the quiet, deliberate movement of a man accustomed to commanding attention without demanding it. His perfectly tailored dark suit, a silhouette of understated power, seemed to absorb the ambient light, making him appear a focal point in the dimly lit room. He moved with an almost regal stride, each step measured and precise, an unyielding trajectory across the polished wooden floor. Diners paused mid-bite, conversations tapered into murmurs, and even the clinking of cutlery seemed to cease, replaced by an anticipatory silence that vibrated with unspoken questions. Every eye in the room, from the busy waiters to the casual couples, now followed his path, drawn by an invisible thread of authority. He stopped directly beside Chloe and Brett's table, his presence immediately dwarfing the stockbroker, who, mid-sentence about his half of the bill, suddenly looked less like a titan of finance and more like a petulant child caught in a transgression. Brett, caught off guard, stumbled over his words, his face momentarily slack with confusion, before a flicker of annoyance, then recognition, crossed his features. Alexander Vance was not just a millionaire, he was the Alexander Vance, a name synonymous with insurmountable wealth and influence in New York City. Chloe, her hand still pressed to her wet eye, felt a shadow fall over her. She slowly lowered her tissue, her gaze lifting, hesitant, disbelieving. Her eyes, still glistening with unshed tears, widened as she recognized him. Alexander Vance, her employer, the man whose penthouse she had spent hours meticulously cleaning, a silent, almost mythical figure in her daily life. He stood there, impossibly close, his piercing blue eyes fixed not on her but on Brett. "Mr. Harrison," Alexander's voice was calm, a low baritone that cut through the silence with chilling precision. "I believe you were just discussing the cost of a date and the value of a person's dignity." He reached into his inner jacket pocket, extracting a crisp $100 bill with an elegant flourish. He laid it flat on the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of Brett, its green hue a stark contrast to the white. "This," Alexander stated, his gaze cutting through the stockbroker's bluster like a surgical blade, "should more than cover Miss Davis's dignity, a commodity which you, sir, demonstrably lack." The words hung in the air, weighted with an undeniable authority. Brett, initially stunned into silence, now flushed a mottled red, his jaw working uselessly. He opened his mouth, but no sound escaped. He seemed to shrink under Alexander's unwavering gaze, his expensive suit suddenly appearing less impressive, more like a costume. The power dynamic, only moments ago so devastatingly clear in Brett's favor, had irrevocably shifted. Alexander then turned his attention to Chloe, his expression softening almost imperceptibly, the cold precision in his eyes replaced by a quiet, empathetic concern. Chloe, whose heart was now hammering against her ribs, felt a bewildering mix of mortification and a nascent, fragile gratitude. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and a flicker of tears that now truly threatened to fall, locked with his. "And for your time, Miss Davis," Alexander continued, his voice softer now, meant only for her, "please allow me to extend a sincere apology for this utterly deplorable experience. It is not one you deserved." A gasp, quiet but audible, rippled through the dining room. Heads turned, whispers erupted. The attentive waiter, who had been hovering nearby, sensing the dramatic tension, now approached, his face a mask of polite concern, but his eyes alight with curiosity. Alexander, without breaking eye contact with Chloe, nodded subtly at the waiter. "Please ensure Miss Davis receives anything she desires tonight on my tab, and arrange for a discreet luxury car service to take her home to Astoria." "Immediately." Chloe, overwhelmed, initially attempted to protest. Her fiercely independent pride, a shield she had cultivated over years of self-reliance, warred with the unexpected, profound kindness. "Mr. Vance, no, please, you don't have to," she began, her voice barely a whisper, thick with emotion. Alexander, however, dismissed her objections with a firm but gentle nod, his expression conveying that the matter was not up for debate. He treated the act not as charity, but as a simple, necessary act of principle. His presence was not one of a benefactor, but of someone setting a wrong right. He looked back at Brett, who was still trying to compose himself, his face a mixture of humiliation and barely contained rage. "I strongly suggest you learn to treat people with respect, Mr. Harrison." Alexander's voice was low, but carried an edge of steel. "The world, you may find, is far smaller than your ego." With that final, chilling warning, Alexander Vance, a man whose public appearances were usually confined to philanthropic galas or corporate announcements, turned and exited the restaurant with the same unhurried, commanding stride with which he had entered. He left behind a bewildered Brett, a tearful but deeply grateful Chloe, and a dining room alive with the hushed, excited whispers of a story that would soon explode online. The immediate aftermath was a blur for Chloe. The waiter, a young man named Marco who had witnessed the entire scene with wide-eyed fascination, now approached her table, his demeanor shifting from standard politeness to almost reverent deference. "Miss Davis," he began, his voice soft, "Mr. Vance has indeed settled your entire bill, and he insisted you order anything at all for dessert or another drink on his tab." He gestured to the menu, but Chloe could only shake her head, her mind reeling. The sheer generosity, coupled with the profound public validation, was too much to process. The weight of the insult had not vanished, but it had been momentarily eclipsed by the unexpected kindness. A few minutes later, Marco discreetly informed her that her car was waiting. Chloe rose from the table, her legs feeling strangely disconnected from her body. She didn't dare look back at Brett, who she imagined was still stewing in his humiliation. She simply walked, head held high, out of the bistro, her entire being vibrating with a mix of shock, relief, and a dizzying sense of the surreal. Outside, a sleek black town car waited at the curb, its engine purring almost silently. The uniformed chauffeur, holding the door open, greeted her with impeccable courtesy, confirming her name. Sliding into the plush leather seat, Chloe sank back against the headrest, the cool, quiet luxury of the interior, a stark contrast to the cacophony of her emotions. This was a world so far removed from her usual commute on the N train, jostling with tired bodies and the scent of the city. Here she was cocooned, shielded, almost invisible, yet at the same time profoundly seen. The car moved smoothly through the East Village streets, then onto the bridge towards Queens. Chloe watched the city lights blur past, her mind replaying the scene in the bistro over and over again. Brett's sneering words, the hot flush of shame, the single tear that escaped. And then Alexander Vance, his imposing figure, his calm, authoritative voice, the crisp $100 bill, his fierce defense of her dignity. It had been like something out of a movie, an impossible fantasy come to life. Her employer, the detached millionaire, had seen her humiliation, not just as an employee but as a human being, and had intervened with a force that had left everyone, including her, utterly speechless. The shame was still there, a lingering ember in her chest, but it was now tempered by a profound sense of validation. Alexander Vance hadn't offered her charity. He had offered her respect, demanding it on her behalf when she felt too small to demand it herself. His words, "It is not one you deserved," echoed in her mind, a powerful balm to her wounded pride. For years, Chloe had carried a quiet dignity, an unwavering sense of self-worth that no amount of financial struggle or casual disregard from the city's privileged could truly diminish. Yet in that moment with Brett, it had felt fragile, teetering on the brink of collapse. Alexander Vance, a man who barely knew her, had seen it, recognized it, and fought for it. As the car glided into Astoria, the familiar streets of her neighborhood offered a comforting sense of normalcy, yet nothing felt normal. The experience had been too jarring, too extraordinary. She thanked the chauffeur, who refused a tip with a polite smile, explaining that Mr. Vance had taken care of everything. Entering her modest apartment, the quiet enveloped her, amplifying the chaotic swirl of thoughts. She kicked off her shoes, the plum dress suddenly feeling heavy, carrying the residue of humiliation and a strange, exhilarating triumph. She made herself a cup of chamomile tea, her hands still trembling slightly as she held the warm mug. How could she reconcile the Chloe who cleaned Alexander Vance's floors, a woman invisible in her uniform, with the Chloe who had just been championed by him in a public spectacle? The chasm between her world and his seemed to have been momentarily bridged, not by her ascent but by his descent into the messy human drama of her life. If you've ever found yourself at a crossroads, where one unexpected moment shatters everything you thought you knew about your place in the world, you understand the dizzying mix of fear and exhilaration that coursed through Chloe. It was a moment of profound recognition, a sudden blinding light on her quiet struggles. This feeling, this raw human experience of being seen when you least expect it, is a universal truth. She sat on her worn sofa, staring into the flickering glow of her laptop screen, but her mind was elsewhere. She wondered what Alexander Vance was thinking. Why had he done it? Was it a mere act of chivalry or something more? A simple principle, he had called it. But in a city often defined by its ruthless ambition and indifference, such an act felt anything but simple. Unbeknownst to Chloe, the story was already beginning to spread like wildfire. Her grainy cell phone video, filmed by a discreet diner, had captured Alexander's dramatic entrance, his terse exchange with Brett, and his quiet conversation with Chloe. The footage, posted anonymously online, quickly garnered thousands of views. Eyewitness accounts filled with speculative details and breathless excitement began to populate social media feeds. The narrative of the millionaire's dramatic intervention at the Eastwick Bistro went viral across platforms, fueled by the stark contrast between Brett's entitlement and Alexander's unexpected defense. Chloe Davis, initially mortified, was about to find herself a reluctant internet sensation, her $10 and iced tea becoming unlikely symbols of resilience against entitlement. Her quiet, carefully managed life was no longer hers alone. It had been swept into a public spectacle, and the world, it seemed, was only just beginning to watch. The silence of her apartment, usually a comfort, now felt like the calm before a storm that promised to change everything she had ever known. The days following the Eastwick Bistro incident blurred into a surreal whirlwind, each 24-hour cycle bringing a fresh wave of bewildered disbelief. Chloe Davis, a woman accustomed to the quiet hum of her cleaning trolley and the predictable rhythm of her subway commute, suddenly found herself at the epicenter of a digital storm. The grainy cell phone footage, initially a single anonymous upload, had metastasized across every social media platform imaginable. It was everywhere. Snippets of Alexander Vance's authoritative voice, the unmistakable flash of the $100 bill, and Brett Harrison's slack-jawed, humiliated expression. Her $10, once a symbol of her careful budgeting, had inexplicably morphed into an unlikely emblem of resilience against the towering entitlement of the city's privileged. She was no longer just Chloe Davis, housekeeper from Astoria. She was the $10 date girl, the maid vindicated by a millionaire, a reluctant internet sensation whose face, though often blurred in the low-quality videos, was now instantly recognizable. The mortification was immediate and profound, a deep blush that settled permanently on her cheeks whenever she so much as glanced at her phone. She would scroll reluctantly through the deluge of comments, a mix of fervent support and scathing judgment. Good for her, rich guys always think they're entitled. She probably set him up, gold digger move. Vance is such a legend. That dude got what he deserved. Why was she even on a date with only $10? Desperate much? The sheer volume of opinion, of strangers dissecting her most vulnerable moment, felt like a public stripping of her private life, leaving her exposed and raw. She tried to ignore it, to dismiss it, but the intrusive buzz of notifications, the knowing glances on the subway, made it impossible to escape. Her carefully constructed anonymity, her quiet struggle, had been violently shattered. Her co-workers at Vance's penthouse complex, a tight-knit but often gossipy group, whispered endlessly behind cupped hands. There was a mix of envy in their voices. Can you believe Vance actually stood up for her and protective concern? I hope she's okay, all that attention can be dangerous. Maria, her friend and the unwitting matchmaker for the disastrous date, swung between fervent apologies and excited declarations. Chloe, this is amazing. Your life is going to change, she'd enthuse, completely missing the look of dread that would flicker across Chloe's face. Maybe Alexander Vance will notice you for real now. Chloe would simply shake her head, trying to steer the conversation back to the mundane, to the reassuring rhythm of their work. At home, the news was even harder to manage. Her grandmother, Eleanor, whose worsening arthritis confined her to a small room in a Brooklyn brownstone, saw the story on a local news segment. "My Chloe, on the television?" Eleanor had asked, her voice tinged with a fragile confusion. "But you always loved to be so quiet, dear." It was hard for Eleanor to reconcile the quiet, determined woman she knew, the granddaughter, who meticulously saved every penny for her treatment, with the sensationalized figure splashed across blogs and evening news segments. Chloe tried to explain, to downplay the drama, but the worry in Eleanor's eyes, the way her grandmother kept asking if she was truly all right, if anyone had hurt her, only added to Chloe's burden. It felt as though her quiet fight to care for Eleanor, a private, sacred objective, had been turned into public fodder. The constant scrutiny, the feeling of being perpetually observed, was exhausting. She simply wanted her anonymous life back, the one where her only worries were rent and her grandmother's medicine. Unbeknownst to Chloe, the man responsible for her sudden notoriety was experiencing his own, more subtle, internal shift. Alexander Vance, a man whose life was usually a meticulously planned sequence of strategic decisions and high-stakes negotiations, found his detached interest in Chloe morphing into a genuine fascination. He rarely allowed personal sentiment to intrude on his rigorously disciplined existence, a consequence of a personal tragedy years earlier that had hardened his heart against casual emotional connections. Yet the image of Chloe's quiet dignity in the face of Brett Harrison's crude assault, the almost imperceptible tremor in her hands, the steely defiance in her eyes, had lodged itself stubbornly in his mind. He began observing her, not just as an efficient employee who moved through his penthouse like a shadow, but as a person of unexpected depth. His keen, analytical mind, usually reserved for parsing complex financial data, now turned its sharp focus to Chloe Davis. He would watch her during her shifts, not directly, but through the peripheral vision of his study, or through the subtle cues left in her wake. He noticed the way she meticulously organized his rare books, not just alphabetically, but by color and size, anticipating his unstated preferences. He observed the quiet intensity with which she worked, a focus that spoke of an inner world far richer than her uniform suggested. Through subtle inquiries, leveraging the extensive network of Vance holdings without drawing undue attention, Alexander began to gather information. He spoke to the building's superintendent, to the head of his domestic staff, even to a few of Chloe's more outgoing co-workers, all under the guise of optimizing employee satisfaction. What he discovered both surprised and intrigued him. The quiet woman who cleaned his home was not just diligent, she was formidable. He learned she was fluent in 3 languages: Spanish, which she spoke with her grandmother, and in her neighborhood, French, which she had learned through an online course and practiced by listening to old movies, and a smattering of Mandarin, picked up during a brief stint working for a Chinese diplomat's family. He found out she secretly tutored her teenage niece, Clara, in advanced mathematics, helping her navigate challenging calculus problems that Clara's underfunded public school struggled to provide support for. And, most remarkably, she dedicated her scarce free time volunteering at a local soup kitchen in Harlem, quietly serving meals, listening to stories, and offering comfort to those even less fortunate than herself. Alexander realized that beneath the practical, unassuming uniform, there was a quiet, formidable intellect, and a profound compassion to her that had been utterly invisible to him before. She was not merely a housekeeper. She was a polyglot, a mentor, a humanitarian. His internal objective shifted from mere interest to a growing desire to genuinely connect with and understand her. He found himself wanting to know what drove her, what hidden dreams fueled her quiet ambition. He saw in her a rare blend of strength and humility, a resilient spirit that refused to be broken by circumstance. This was a discovery that resonated deep within him, touching a part of his own hardened heart he thought long lost. However, this newfound attention was met with Chloe's ingrained resistance. Fiercely independent and wary of motives, she maintained a professional distance, a polite but firm barrier between them. She'd offer curt, respectful answers to his unusual questions about her weekend or her interests, her gaze unwavering but guarded. She feared she might be perceived as a project, an object of pity, or worse, a charity case rather than a deserving individual. She'd spent her entire life fighting to stand on her own 2 feet, to earn every bit of respect she received. The idea of being discovered or helped felt like a betrayal of that struggle, a diminishment of her hard-won self-reliance. She politely deflected his attempts at conversation beyond work-related matters, her guardedness a shield forged from years of necessity. She couldn't shake the feeling that this millionaire, for all his sudden kindness, couldn't possibly understand her world, or her relentless pursuit of a better life for Eleanor. The very act of his intervention, while appreciated, had also stripped her of her anonymity, leaving her vulnerable in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Simultaneously, the humiliated Brett Harrison, seething with a vengeful rage, was far from quietly licking his wounds. The public shaming had been a devastating blow to his inflated ego and his carefully constructed image. He had become a laughingstock in his circles, his once secure social standing now precarious. His trading triumphs, once bragged about, were now met with knowing smirks. He blamed Chloe entirely, convinced that she had orchestrated the entire incident, that her tears were a performance, her humility a cunning ploy to extract sympathy and attention. He was determined to make her pay. Leveraging his father's dwindling but still existent connections within certain fringe media circles, Brett launched a malicious smear campaign. He fabricated outrageous stories, portraying Chloe as a manipulative gold digger who had orchestrated the entire bistro scene for financial gain. He painted her as a conniving opportunist, a schemer who preyed on the wealthy. He planted false accusations in a particularly venomous little-known gossip column, insinuating that she had a history of manipulating older, wealthy men, that she had been fired from previous jobs for questionable conduct. These articles, though appearing in obscure corners of the internet, began to circulate, picking up traction in the more aggressive, less scrupulous corners of the blogosphere. They were designed to destroy her reputation, to dismantle the quiet dignity Alexander Vance had so publicly championed. The smear campaign escalated, culminating in a particularly venomous article that directly threatened Chloe's job security at Vance Holdings. It accused her of unprofessional conduct, of using her position to gain access to influential figures for personal gain, and hinted at further investigations into her dubious past. The article, a blatant fabrication, was a crushing blow. It added a suffocating layer of pressure and fear to her already precarious existence. Every morning, she woke with a knot of dread in her stomach, wondering what new lie would surface, what new accusation would jeopardize her livelihood. Her meticulous savings for Eleanor's treatment, her entire carefully built future, suddenly felt terribly vulnerable, teetering on the edge of collapse. She considered confronting Brett, but what good would that do? His anger was a destructive, irrational force. She thought about approaching Alexander Vance, but her pride rebelled. She had accepted his help once out of necessity, but to now go to him with her personal problems, to ask him to fight her battles, felt like a concession she wasn't ready to make. It would confirm in her own mind that she was indeed the helpless charity case she so desperately fought not to be. She was torn between her fierce independence and the very real threat to her future. The online whispers and the increasingly vicious articles were no longer just an annoyance. They were a direct assault on her character, her reputation, and her ability to provide for her grandmother. The weight of it all was immense. She saw the concerned glances from her co-workers, the speculative looks from the building staff, even the head of domestic staff, Ms. Albright, a stern but fair woman, had called Chloe into her office for an uncomfortable, though ultimately supportive, conversation about media attention and its potential impact on employee conduct. Chloe felt trapped, caught between the unwanted spotlight of her accidental fame and the insidious shadows cast by Brett's malice. Every clean surface in Alexander Vance's penthouse, every polished crystal, every neatly arranged book, felt like a silent judgment. She was serving the very man who had unwittingly thrust her into this mess, the man whose wealth and power were now tangentially responsible for both her unwanted renown and her escalating anxieties. The tension was a constant companion, a tightening in her chest that made breathing a conscious effort. She cleaned with a renewed, almost desperate vigor, as if scrubbing harder could somehow erase the unwanted attention, could somehow restore the quiet anonymity she craved. But the articles continued to surface, each one more insidious than the last, systematically eroding the carefully built foundation of her life. They whispered of manipulation, of deceit, of a woman who was not what she seemed. And for the first time in a very long time, Chloe felt a profound fear, a chilling realization that her quiet resilience might not be enough to withstand this onslaught. Her grandmother's health, her one unwavering objective, depended on her continued employment, her ability to earn. And now even that was under threat, not by her own failings, but by the vengeful malice of a man she had met only once, on a blind date with $10 in her purse. The calm before the storm had given way to an unsettling turbulence, and Chloe, alone in the vast impersonal city, braced herself for what was to come, knowing that a critical decision or an impossible confrontation loomed just over the horizon. The escalating smear campaign, fueled by Brett Harrison's venomous rage, had finally pushed Alexander Vance to his limit. He watched with a grim fascination as the online gossip and fringe articles intensified, each fabricated story more audacious than the last. He saw the subtle changes in Chloe during her shifts, the faint circles under her eyes, the way her shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight, the polite but increasingly strained smile. He knew the pressure she was under, the insidious nature of Brett's attacks, designed not just to humiliate, but to destroy. A silent defense, Alexander realized, would be utterly insufficient. Her quiet dignity, which had so captivated him, was now a target, and he could not stand by and watch it be dismantled. His decision, once made, was executed with the same meticulous planning and strategic precision he applied to his most complex business deals. He recognized the public nature of the problem demanded a public, decisive solution. He meticulously planned a press conference, ostensibly to announce a significant new philanthropic initiative for Vance Holdings, a perfectly plausible corporate event designed to draw the attention of New York's top media. But beneath this polished veneer lay a calculated hidden agenda, the complete and utter dismantling of Brett Harrison's lies and the undeniable vindication of Chloe Davis. The day arrived, crisp and cold, a typical New York autumn morning. Reporters, photographers, and camera crews converged on the opulent grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, a gilded cage of old-world luxury. The air crackled with the restless energy of the media, all eager for the next big story. Alexander Vance, a man who rarely granted such public access, was a magnet for their attention. Before a phalanx of New York's media, Alexander took the podium, his presence commanding, his expression grave but composed. He began by outlining the Vance Foundation's significant new commitment to community upliftment, detailing initiatives focused on education and urban renewal in underserved neighborhoods. He spoke with his usual eloquence, his voice steady and authoritative, painting a compelling vision of social responsibility. The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and the initial objective of the press conference seemed to be unfolding as expected. Then, with a gravitas that silenced the room, Alexander shifted the focus. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy, drawing every eye to him. "Today," he began, his voice ringing with a new, unexpected conviction, "I am also here to address a matter of profound injustice, one that has unfolded in the very public arena of social media, and which threatens to undermine the integrity of an individual whose character is beyond reproach." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. This was not typical Vance Holdings fare. Alexander continued, his words slow, deliberate, each syllable imbued with undeniable weight. "As many of you know, several weeks ago, an unfortunate incident occurred at the Eastwick Bistro, which, regrettably, involved one of my employees." He then proceeded to narrate the entire incident, recounting Brett Harrison's appalling behavior in meticulous, unbiased detail. He didn't embellish, didn't exaggerate, he simply stated the facts, laying bare the stockbroker's arrogance, his condescension, his casual cruelty, and the public mockery of Chloe's carefully budgeted $10. Then, a screen behind him flickered to life. Alexander displayed irrefutable photographic evidence corroborating his account. There were time-stamped CCTV stills from the bistro, showing Brett arriving late, Chloe's quiet demeanor, Brett's animated, pontificating gestures, and then Alexander himself, striding purposefully to the table. The images were damning, leaving no room for doubt about the sequence of events. He then seamlessly juxtaposed this visual evidence with compelling testimonials. He projected enlarged scans of Chloe's impeccable employment records from Vance Holdings, highlighting her consistent dedication and flawless performance over several years. He presented notarized letters from the director of the Harlem Soup Kitchen, where Chloe volunteered, detailing her extensive, selfless contributions. There was even a poignant handwritten thank you note from Clara, Chloe's niece, praising her aunt's incredible patience and skill in tutoring her in advanced mathematics. He spoke of her impressive linguistic skills, her fluency in 3 languages, a fact he presented not as a curiosity, but as an undeniable testament to her formidable intellect and drive. He spoke of her unwavering compassion, her quiet resilience, her profound integrity. With each piece of evidence, each carefully chosen word, Alexander systematically dismantled every one of Brett's false accusations. The exposé was devastating for Brett Harrison. His lies and bullying, once confined to obscure corners of the internet, were now publicly unmasked before the most influential media outlets in New York. The fallout would be immediate, far-reaching, and catastrophic for his career and reputation. Chloe, meanwhile, was not in the ballroom. Alexander, anticipating her fierce independence and aversion to the spotlight, had arranged for her to watch the live broadcast from a discreet private viewing suite within the plaza. Seated on a plush velvet sofa, a glass of water untouched beside her, she watched the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. Each of Alexander's words, each piece of evidence, felt like a physical blow, simultaneously painful and profoundly exhilarating. Tears, hot and streaming, poured down her face, but these were not tears of humiliation or shame. These were tears of profound, overwhelming vindication, a tidal wave of emotion washing over years of quiet struggle, over weeks of insidious fear and dread. It was as if every insult, every dismissive glance, every cruel barb she had ever endured was being systematically acknowledged and reversed. She saw her life, her true character laid bare, not by her own choice, but by a powerful ally who saw beyond her circumstances. Then came the moment that sent shockwaves through the corporate and philanthropic worlds, a move so unexpected, so unprecedented, that even the jaded reporters in the ballroom gasped. Alexander paused again, his gaze sweeping across the room, ensuring he had everyone's undivided attention. His voice, now filled with a vibrant, unmistakable conviction, resonated with a new purpose. "Therefore," he announced, his eyes fixed directly into the primary camera lens, "in recognition of Miss Chloe Davis's unparalleled integrity, her remarkable intellect, her unwavering compassion, and her tireless dedication to her community, I am proud to announce her appointment as the inaugural Director of Community Outreach for the Vance Foundation. A collective gasp, then a frantic flurry of whispers and camera flashes erupted in the ballroom. Alexander continued, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. Her lived experience, her innate empathy, and her profound understanding of the challenges faced by New York's underserved communities make her the ideal leader for this crucial endeavor. This is not merely an act of recognition, he added, preempting any cynical interpretations, but a strategic decision to place a truly extraordinary individual at the helm of an initiative that demands nothing less than her unique blend of heart and intellect. For Chloe, watching from the private suite, the words hit her with the force of a physical impact. Director of Community Outreach, the Vance Foundation. The words were almost incomprehensible. The position, with a salary that would finally secure Eleanor's specialized treatment, ensure her comfort, and offer Chloe a stable, dignified future, was an unprecedented opportunity. It was not just a job, it was a testament to her hidden talents, her compassionate spirit, her quiet strength, all recognized and celebrated by a man whose world was so far removed from her own. Tears streamed down her face, unbidden, unstoppable. She accepted in that silent, emotional moment, not just for the life-changing security it offered, not just for Eleanor, but for the profound belief Alexander Vance had shown in her. It was a belief that transcended their disparate worlds, that saw beyond her uniform and her $10 budget, straight to the core of who she truly was. It was a belief that offered not pity, but opportunity, not charity, but empowerment. The aftermath of the press conference was swift and decisive. Brett Harrison's carefully constructed life imploded. The online smear campaign vanished, replaced by a torrent of public condemnation against him. His father's dwindling connections proved useless against the might of Vance Holdings and Alexander's irrefutable evidence. He was swiftly fired from his stockbroker position, his professional reputation irrevocably destroyed. He became, ironically, the new public face of entitlement and corporate bullying, a stark reminder of the consequences of unmitigated cruelty. For Chloe, the transformation was immediate, overwhelming, and exhilarating. Her phone, once a source of anxiety, now buzzed with messages of congratulations, support, and genuine admiration. Old friends, long out of touch, reached out. Colleagues, even those who had initially been envious, offered sincere good wishes. Her grandmother, Eleanor, tearfully proud, could finally see a tangible path to the treatment she desperately needed. The financial security, once a distant dream, was now a solid reality. The first few weeks in her new role were a whirlwind of learning and adjustment. The corporate world was entirely different from the quiet efficiency of housekeeping. There were meetings, presentations, budgets, and intricate logistical challenges. But Chloe, with her innate intelligence and meticulous work ethic, adapted with remarkable speed. She devoured every document, asked insightful questions, and brought a fresh perspective, unburdened by corporate dogma, to the Vance Foundation. Her lived experience, her deep understanding of the communities she was now tasked with serving, proved to be an invaluable asset. She spoke to people with genuine empathy, not condescension, and her ideas for outreach programs were innovative and deeply human. Alexander Vance, true to his word, ensured she had all the resources she needed. He held frequent meetings with her, not just to oversee her progress, but to genuinely listen to understand her vision. Their professional partnership deepened, transitioning from employer and employee to colleagues working towards a shared, meaningful purpose. He observed her in this new environment, watching her flourish, seeing her confidence bloom, and felt a quiet satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. The detached interest he once felt had evolved into something more profound, a deep mutual respect, an unspoken understanding and a dawning undeniable affection that permeated every shared moment, every focused discussion. He found himself increasingly engaged in the Foundation's work, often joining Chloe on site visits, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to be part of the change she was orchestrating. His own objective had undergone a remarkable transformation. He had discovered a purpose far beyond profit margins, a deeply human connection he had believed was lost to him forever. He, the millionaire who saw his maid being insulted, had in turn found a new version of himself in the quiet strength of Chloe Davis. The chasm between their worlds, once vast and insurmountable, was slowly, delicately being bridged brick by shared purpose and an unexpected burgeoning connection. Months later, the transformation of Chloe Davis was not merely external, but profoundly internal, radiating from within like a quiet, steady light. No longer defined by her housekeeper's uniform or the rigid limits of her $10 budget, she thrived in her demanding new role as Director of Community Outreach for the Vance Foundation. She moved with a newfound grace and confidence, her voice, once soft and unassuming, now resonating with conviction and authority in boardrooms and community centers alike. The faint scent of cleaning solutions that once clung to her hands had long since vanished, replaced by the subtle, crisp fragrance of purpose. She spearheaded several impactful initiatives across underserved neighborhoods in New York City, drawing on her lived experience, her innate empathy, and her formidable organizational skills. The community centers she established in Astoria and the Bronx, places often forgotten by the city's elite, became vibrant hubs of learning and support. They offered free after-school tutoring, vocational training programs, and health clinics, all testaments to her vision and relentless dedication. She saw the faces of the people she served, recognized their struggles, and understood the profound impact a helping hand could have. Her work was not just a job, it was a calling, a deeply personal mission to create opportunities where none had existed before. Alexander Vance, once a figure synonymous with detached power and strategic coldness, found himself increasingly engaged in the Foundation's work, his own transformation mirroring Chloe's in its quiet profundity. The sterile grandeur of his penthouse and the high-stakes world of corporate acquisitions now seemed less compelling than the tangible impact of their initiatives. He often joined Chloe on site visits, not merely as a figurehead, but as an active participant, listening intently to community members, offering insights, and observing the genuine connections Chloe forged. He saw how the Foundation, under her leadership, was genuinely changing lives, and in doing so it was changing him. His objective, once solely focused on profit margins and strategic dominance, had undergone a remarkable shift. He had discovered a purpose far beyond personal gain, a deeply human connection he had believed was lost to him forever after the personal tragedy that had hardened his heart years ago. Chloe's unwavering compassion, her unwavering belief in the potential of every individual, had slowly but surely chipped away at his cynicism, revealing a renewed sense of hope and a profound understanding of what truly mattered. Their professional partnership had blossomed into a relationship built on deep mutual respect, understanding, and an undeniable, though largely unspoken, affection that permeated every shared moment. During long hours in meetings, their eyes would meet across the polished table, a silent communication passing between them that spoke of shared purpose and growing admiration. On site visits, Alexander would watch Chloe interact with the community, her laughter easy and genuine, and find himself smiling, a rare, unbidden warmth spreading through him. He found himself seeking her counsel not just on Foundation matters, but on broader perspectives, valuing her unique insight and moral compass. One crisp autumn evening, as the city lights began to twinkle against a darkening sky, Chloe and Alexander found themselves, by quiet, deliberate arrangement, back at the Eastwick Bistro. It was not a grand public affair, but a private, intimate dinner, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had embarked upon. They were seated at the very table where months ago Chloe had endured such profound humiliation. The memory, though still vivid, no longer carried the sting of shame, but rather the quiet strength of resilience. Chloe, now dressed in an elegant but understated navy blue silk dress that flowed gracefully around her, gracefully perused the menu. Her hands, no longer smelling of cleaning solutions, rested calmly on the white tablecloth. She felt no compulsion to limit herself to an iced tea, no longer constrained by the rigid limits of $10. She chose a delicate pasta dish, her decision made with quiet confidence, a stark contrast to the anxiety that had once defined her choices in this very room. Alexander, seated across the table, watched her, a rare, genuine warmth in his eyes, a gentle smile playing on his lips. It was a stark contrast to the guarded, often unreadable expression he once wore. The man who had entered this bistro months ago, a titan of industry cloaked in emotional detachment, was now subtly, beautifully different. The silence that fell between them as they waited for their meal was not awkward, but comfortable, filled with the unspoken weight of shared history and burgeoning possibilities. There was no grand romantic gesture that evening, no sudden dramatic declaration of love that would have felt out of place with their carefully cultivated, deeply respectful connection. Instead, their shared glance, imbued with understanding and a quiet, blossoming hope, spoke volumes about the extraordinary journey they had embarked upon. Their eyes met across the table, a connection that transcended words, acknowledging the past, celebrating the present, and hinting at a future yet to be written. The meal was punctuated by easy conversation about the Foundation's progress, about Eleanor's improving health, a direct result of the specialized treatment Chloe could now afford, about the small victories in the Bronx, and the future projects they envisioned. They spoke of the challenges too, but always with a shared sense of purpose, a united front against the world's complexities. As they lingered over coffee, the bistro slowly emptying around them, Chloe reflected on how irrevocably her life had changed. It hadn't been a single dramatic event, but a series of interconnected moments, beginning with that fateful blind date and ending, or rather continuing, here. Her life had been redefined not by the paltry $10 she once carried, but by the indomitable dignity she possessed, the unexpected kindness she had received, and the profound courage she had found to embrace a destiny far grander and more meaningful than she had ever dared to dream. The whispers of the past, the humiliation she had once felt, had been transformed into a quiet strength, a testament to her unwavering spirit. The lingering question, whispered by the soft clinking of cutlery from a distant table and the gentle hum of the dwindling conversation, was whether this extraordinary partnership, forged in an act of public humiliation and solidified by deep mutual respect, would ultimately evolve into a love story that truly transcended the vast chasm of their vastly different worlds. They came from opposite ends of the social spectrum, one born into privilege, the other into struggle, yet their paths had converged in the most unexpected way, woven together by an invisible thread of shared humanity and a profound belief in the power of respect and kindness. The future remained wide open, brimming with countless possibilities, but one thing was undeniably certain. Chloe's life had been irrevocably changed, and in that transformation, Alexander had found a profound, unexpected connection that had breathed new life into his own. Their story, however, was a reminder that true value is rarely found in the price tag of a meal or the cut of a suit. It is found in the quiet strength that defies insult, the unexpected kindness that redefines dignity, and the profound belief in another person's worth that can, in turn, transform entire lives. It teaches us that compassion can bridge the widest divides, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are revealed not in grand declarations, but in the quiet, unwavering respect shown when the world least expects it. May we all be reminded to look beyond the surface, to see the quiet dignity in everyone, and to always champion what is right, for in doing so, we not only change the lives of others, but enrich our own beyond measure. If you were moved by Chloe's journey and Alexander's unexpected intervention, please like, share this powerful story, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that prove kindness and integrity are the truest currencies. Because sometimes a single act of courage can rewrite a destiny and spark a connection that lasts forever.